We are going to be in a working process. When we're editing a pattern, you're going to stay in this default or higher particle distance. Your PD should be around 20. This will keep your processing at a quicker speed. Pieces in this dress specifically that I've lowered during the working process, just so they don't collide with other pieces. The collar, this is a piece small enough to put into a lower PD, and as well the sleeves. So when you have smaller pattern pieces like that, you want them to be in that lower PD so they don't collide with other pieces, such as the front of the dress that it's laying on. The sort of rule of thumb with particle distance, if it is a pattern piece that is smaller than your hand, you want to lower it. And it's usually around 5. 5 is a really good quality particle distance. You don't really lower your other pieces until you're ready to preview the drape of the garment. Maybe you want to see a more naturally draping garment, or if you're about to do a final render, then you would lower everything. So we're working in this default PD of 20, except for these smaller pieces. And let's recap on these tools really quick. The one I'm currently in is this transform pattern tool. Sometimes I refer to this as the basic selection tool or the selection tool. You can click on any pattern just in the body of it and it will select the entire thing. It will also select smaller things. So like this internal line right here, I can select just that, and you know it's selected because it's highlighted in this yellow and blue, meaning that it was a symmetrical pattern created when you have both yellow and blue highlight. You can also scale. When you're in this transform pattern tool, you can scale using this bounding box. The corners will scale it. Command Z to undo that. And you can also rotate with this tool. Now the edit pattern tool is going to allow you to select single segments, so any line in between segment points, and you can grab that and move that just by itself independently, and segment points, those can move as well. This is going to be your main tool that you're using when you're adjusting your patterns. Every tool in the toolbar that has this little arrow in the bottom right hand corner means that there are more tools underneath this. So left click and hold and you'll get this other menu. So edit pattern is the tool that we're in. Remember, this is hotkey Z. So to really quicken up your work process, your workflow, try to remember these hotkeys. Transform point and segment tool, edit curve point, edit curvature, smooth curve, add point split line. This add point split line is another good hotkey to know when you just want to add a point really quick to any segment. Hotkey X. So we'll be using some of those to make some changes with our shapes. So if I wanted to start a pattern from scratch, you definitely want to use your silhouette of the avatar. And to create patterns, we need our Polygon tool. And that's this tool, the fourth tool. We're going to pass up this add fullness tool and go right to this one. It's the little rectangle with a bite taken out of the top right corner. If I long hold on this, we have our polygon, rectangle tool, ellipse tool, and spiral tool. All of these are going to give you pattern shapes to use, and they will be actual patterns that create garments. So to start, I'm just going to use that regular polygon tool. This is what we use to create freeform shapes. If you know you need a rectangle, then you go to the other tools. This is one that you want to use the hotkeys for, or try to remember those. So H for the polygon tool. And if I were to create a, let's say, basic bodice, you want to start in the center, because if it's a symmetric pattern, we want to flip it or unfold it on the center front line, or any center line, whatever pattern you're working on. And it's similar to Illustrator that I left clicked once in the center. I'm trying to imagine the amount of material I need to wrap around this 3D form at the shoulder. And to get curves, you can either do it while you're drawing, just like Illustrator. I could left click again and just make straight lines. And then later on, I would curve it with the Edit Curvature tool. So you can do it that way. Or while you're making it, left click and hold, and it will allow you to make curves while you're drawing it. When you do the curves like this, just like in Illustrator, you have to return back to this point and click on it once to get back to your straight line. You don't want to make your patterns directly on the outline of the silhouette. It's not going to be big enough. You're going to need space. Try to imagine wrapping this 3D form around the body. So I need probably 1.5 inches or so above the shoulder at the HPS right here when I'm creating this, so it can wrap over the shoulder and meet the back bodice. And for the bust of the bodice, you usually need a good amount, and that's way too low. You usually need a good amount of space to create volume for the bust to exist. So I'm coming way out here, and I'm looking at both Y and X axis to see where's my position for the underarm. So this X or Y axis, what level height I'm at in compared to this pit area. So maybe I want a fitted armhole, so just a little drop, and then I want to come out enough for this bust to exist also. From the underarm to the natural waist is typically fine, being a straight seam. You'll see that most commonly, and we'll round out this natural waist angle that's going to happen. And then also consider how much fabric you need to wrap around this out seam around the hip. We could even shape this a little bit if we wanted almost a cocoon or bell shape, but let's stay straight with it for a minute. And then remember, if we don't want the out seam to peak or make any shape when it's sewn to the other panel at the out seam, we want this to be a 90-degree angle coming off of it. So that would mean that I need to drop down to the center front about like this, and then curve it. Same for center front. You can hold Shift to lock this into a to the axis. So I know that my center front is going to be at a perpendicular relation to the other side, the left side. Anytime I use directions like left or right, I'm referring to the wearer's left or right, not our left or right, the wearer's left or right. Okay, so let's say this is the first half of our pattern. We know we want to smooth out this angular shape at the waist. So I'm going to get my, let's say we could use our smooth curve tool and click once on this point and then drag. So I'm clicking, holding, and dragging it to get a curved alteration to that angular shape. I can also edit curvature by, maybe I want to come in a little bit like this. So the edit curvature allows you to pull a segment into a curved shape. So I use this tool a lot, and the quick way to access this, which I use all the time, when I'm in my regular edit pattern tool, I can just hold Option or Alt. See how the icon at my cursor, it's showing us that little triangle, which means we have our regular edit pattern tool, but I want to access the edit curve tool. So I'm going to hold Alt or Option. And then when I hover over that segment, it's going to change into that swervy line. And that means that you're able to use that tool just by holding that key down, which is really handy. So I'm going to use this tool like we used before, just to get a small curve, just to soften that natural waste. I'm going to press Z to go back to my regular edit pattern tool. And before I change much else, because I'm pretty happy with how this looks, maybe this shoulder is a little bit high. I can tell that it's pretty good as far as the shoulder slope. I'm going with the angle of that shoulder slope of the silhouette to create my shoulder seam. So I want to see what happens when I simulate this. And I need to get the other half of this. If it's a symmetrical garment, I'm going to right click and say Unfold Symmetric Editing. Remember, we have these two options with this pop-up menu, and you get different options with your pop-up menu depending on what tool you're using. So I'm using the Edit Pattern tool, and I right-clicked on that center front segment, and it allows me all of these options. Unfold will give you a full pattern, but it will not make changes to both sides. If you make a change to the original right side, it won't happen to the left side. So if I want that to happen and keep my front pattern symmetrical, I would use Unfold Symmetric Editing with Sewing. Now the regular Unfold is great if you do want to make an asymmetrical garment. That's the one you would use, the other one. Okay, so we have our full front pattern. Now let's go back to our Transform Pattern tool, which is A. And I'm going to select this whole piece, and I can, with my pop-up menu, copy and paste just by choosing this, copy, and then also right-click and paste. But it tells you in this pop-up menu that you can also do that with Command-C, Command-V, just like our Illustrator and Photoshop programs. So either way works. It's going to give you this little outline. So place it in an area that makes sense to you. Keep your work organized. I like to place my back sides to our right side if we're looking at the right, but it's on the wearer's left. And so if this is going to be turned around, this is our outseam for our wearer's left side, and then outseam goes to this outseam for the wearer's right side. So you have to think about things backwards when you are sewing it later on. Now we have some changes that we need to make for this back panel, and you want to get your Edit Pattern tool and whatever tool you need to make these changes. But because I have a little bit of patterning experience, right? If you're not familiar with patterning, then this might not be apparent to you, but I already know that, let me get my Edit Pattern tool by pressing Z. I already know that my neckline needs to be higher, my armhole needs to come out a little bit for some more coverage for that back area, and potentially I don't need this as wide right here because I don't have a bust to fit in our backside. So I have my Edit Pattern tool, and I'm just going to click and move this segment point right in the center. I don't want to delete this point or if I right click on it, I don't want to convert to curve points, not yet at least, because either one of those, deleting it or converting it to curve points, that's going to take away your symmetry. And before you do that, you want to make sure your edits are complete. So I'm going to need this a little bit higher, and I also need this to come up. So I can either press on this segment point to get my Bezier handles and arrange that shape, or I can press Alt or Option to get my Edit Curve tool and just click on the segment itself. And when I do that, it also gives me Bezier handles on this side. So I can use this to make sure I have a nice trued center back, so I know it's fully flat. And we can start with that. Maybe it will need some additional changes. I'm going to do that same thing with my Edit Curve tool. Either go up here, long hold, and grab it this way, or I can hold Option or Alt on a Mac and click on the segment and drag it out to the shape that I want. That key, if you want to permanently go into that tool, is hotkey C. So back to my Edit Pattern tool, hotkey Z. Let's say I want to move this entire seam, this out seam, just a little bit inward. I want to select all of this. I can either go one by one, holding Shift and left clicking, so it allows me to make multiple selections of individual pieces, or I can drag a marquee box around all of that. So now it also select, or no, it didn't, never mind. That's all I want to select. So this is helpful because when you need to remember in CLO, unless you surround all of the piece, you're not going to have a full selection. So this is why, by dragging this entire marquee box around this side, that it allows me to just select this full outseam from segment point to segment point down here without selecting this armhole and without selecting this, because the marquee box didn't include the entire section of that armhole or hem. So at that point, I have my outseam selected, and I could just click and drag it over, or I could use my arrows on the keyboard to give it 1 or 2 clicks inward. So I'm going to start with that. And we will likely need some darts in here for shaping. So I already have this other dress in here. I'm going to move it out of the way. And I'm also, because I'm working with this other piece, I don't want this to simulate and fall to the ground when I'm working. I'm going to right click on it and say freeze. So nothing happens to it when I simulate, and it's not going to move anywhere. You can also access that by going into the pop-up menu in the 3D window. So either window, you can right click on a thing and freeze it. And now it says unfreeze because it's already frozen. So I'm going to place this pattern right now. I can already see that my front neckline has a little bit of a V shape happening. So I'm going to grab my Edit Pattern tool, and I'm going to hold Option or Alt to get my Edit Curve tool so I can smooth this out. And that's better. Now I need to place our pieces. And to do that, I can just manually use the gizmo to arrange this close to the body in the correct position. When I want to see a straight on perspective of my avatar, I just press 2. Remember that the numbers on your keyboard give you different perspectives, different views, but 2 I use a lot because that brings you right to the most straightforward view of the front. So I can manually do that with all of my pattern pieces, or I can get my arrangement points. And remember, this is in the vertical toggle menu by the avatar display. The second one in, that's arrangement points, or Shift F. And by using arrangement points, it allows you to quickly place items. So there are some pros and cons with this. The pro is that it curves it to the body a little bit, and that can help get a more appropriate or more what you need as far as arranging for that particular garment. But sometimes it collides or cuts into the avatar body like this, and if I wanted to get or move this away so it didn't do that, like move it all the way to the back, that's too far away. That's not going to give my pattern piece a good enough start when we simulate. One thing to get around that is going into my property editor while that piece is selected and going down to offset. By increasing this number, it allows me to open up the curve that it applied to it. And that looks fine to me. I'm just going to leave this. Actually, let's place this. This one looks like the best option. I'm going to do that same thing, change the offset to it so I don't have such a tight curve happening. Ideally, you want your pattern pieces to be in between the blue dots and the avatar. That means you have a nice snug fit and arrangement with your pieces. And you don't have to be this perfect with it. The only thing is that you have a better, it's going to settle more quickly when you simulate. It's giving your pattern pieces more of an opportunity or a better start, right? Okay, so I'm going to turn the arrangement points off, Shift F. To sew this together, we can use regular segment sewing and free sewing. So the segment sewing is really easy for these shoulders because they're just simple segments. And I know this is my wearer's left shoulder and this is my back wearer's left shoulder. So I'm going to sew them both using the same direction. I have my tick mark close to the avatar at the HPS, and the tick mark needs to be at the HPS over here. That's going to tell the program to create this sewing relation going in the same direction. Otherwise it would be opposite. And to get the rest of it, all we need to sew together are the out seams. And remember, our patterns are symmetrical. So when I stitched that one shoulder seam together, it stitched the other for us. I'm going to grab free sewing for this because we have multiple segments that make up this out seam. So to use the free sewing tool, I'm just going to click once at the start of my sewing relation and click once again to finish the first part of our sewing relation, and again for the one that goes to it. Now at this point we can simulate. So either click this arrow up here in the top left of your 2D or your 3D window, or press spacebar. Okay, so not bad for an initial pattern. Now we want to check some things. Just like in patterning, when we're truing, we want to look at the top to see if we have a smooth organic transition from the front to the back, creating our armhole, top of our armhole. We want to see that this neck is a nice smooth transition. We want to see how the transition from our side is. So we have too much of a curve happening, so that's an easy fix. Let's make those changes really quickly. I'm going to get the regular edit pattern tool, and I want to bring this in just barely, and I need to also get my edit curve tool by holding Alt. That allows me to straighten out this shape so it doesn't create a little peak at the end of the shoulder. Now I haven't simulated yet, right? I changed the front shoulder length, so my back shoulder doesn't match. Normally we want our seams to be exactly the same length, unless you're doing something fancy with a wool and you're tailoring a jacket. Sometimes the back shoulder is eased into a shorter seam in the front, but for this we just want the exact same length. When you have your edit pattern tool and you click on a segment, it will give you that 2D dimension. Right now our length for our shoulder seam is 4.61. I find that going to the 100th is perfectly fine. You could even just go to 4.6 if you wanted. Just go to the tenths. And over here I have 4.8. My options are using my edit pattern tool to move this segment until I see the number that's in the middle of the shoulder seam, until I see that number. See how it's going up and down, 4.3, 4.4, 4.6. We need 4.6, and I remember it was 4.61 if we're using hundredths. So you can do that, or you can right click on this segment and say change length and type in the number exactly, 4.61. Every time you make a change to your pattern, you want to simulate. When you make a bunch of changes and then simulate, things can get a little crazy, but it's good practice and good habit to get into, to simulate after every change. And this looks fine to me, this HPS neckline and shoulder intersection. I want to assess where these armholes are hitting on the arm. Do I want a closer fit? Maybe I would bring it into here, in which case I would bring this in a little bit. Not moving the whole segment like I did, so I'm going to Command Z. I want to just change the curvature so it takes more of the material away. And I want to see how the back hits. That's fine to me. I like having a little more space on this SBL line, the shoulder blade line, the biggest part of our back. That needs extra room and extra ease for movement. The armpit is hitting in an okay spot. We don't necessarily need it any closer. We could bring it a tiny bit closer depending on how fitted you want that armhole and sleeve. The last thing we were talking about is this down here. Now I want to introduce you to another tool that is very helpful when editing patterns, and it's this Styleline tool up here. So the regular one is this top one, Edit Styleline. We also have scale styleline, move styleline, draw styleline, all very, very helpful. So when I have the regular edit styleline, when you hover over a pattern, it's going to want you to click on it, and it turns it into the schematic of your garment. And the edit style line is going to allow you to move a segment in the middle of it. So the segment points stay the same, but it changes the curvature and the line of it. See that what's happening? Even though it looks like an angular point in the 3D window, it really is curving it. That you can see sort of the preview of it in the 2D window when that happens. So I'm going to Command Z to undo that. So that moves and changes the curvature of a segment. Scale style line. So let's say the sweep of this, let's say I didn't like how wide the sweep was and I wanted to make it smaller. You're going to want to select a style line, and then it gives you this sort of slide, right? And when you go up or down, maybe I wanted a bigger sweep. It's going to change that front panel to a much bigger sweep. So what it's referring to as a style line is a segment point, or I mean just a segment, a regular segment. So it's scaling. It's making that segment longer or shorter, scaling it. The next one is move style line, or let me Command Z that, get back to our original sweep. So move style line, up or down. This changes the length of it. This is really helpful. You do want to be careful with how far you take this before simulating. So make incremental changes and then simulate. And this is, it chose and changed the entire length, so the front and the back. The last one is draw style line. This one's really helpful too. It basically allows you to make new style lines in your garment. Let's say I wanted to pattern block this and have some different fabrics or different colors happening. I would click once on a segment and continue over to another segment, and while it is curving in the 3D window when I do this, it's creating a straight line through the pattern itself. So it looks like it's curving, but if I just click left click and then left click again on another segment, it will create a straight line. But another thing to note about this is that we are using a symmetric pattern here. So every style line that I draw into one side, it's going to do it to the other side. If I don't want that, let's say I just wanted this one style line that I created initially, and I didn't want this second one that happened automatically because of our symmetric editing, I would have to remove the symmetric editing on my pattern, which is sort of a bummer because you can't go back to that unless you chopped it in half and then unfolded it again, which is totally doable. But if I wanted to take my symmetric editing off, I would right click on a piece and say remove linked editing, and that would do it. But I don't want that right now. So I'm just going to Command Z out of all of these. So just know that those tools are available to you. And I do want to use the one that is Edit Styleline right now, because the hem, where it comes together at the outseam, that is what I wanted to change when I brought up this tool. So this curve is coming up to a peak when it meets the front panel, and I don't want that to happen. I can even use this to click and drag the points of the in between the segments. So let's say I didn't want to have any sort of curve to it. And that will get you in about the right area visually. So very helpful in the 3D window to get a visual preview of your changes. But the other thing you want to do, because it will make the general changes and you'll get in the vicinity of what you want, but you want to fine tune it. See right here, that is not what I would want for the line coming to center back to have a smooth hemline, right? So I would get back to my Edit Pattern tool, that's hotkey Z, and I would use the Bezier handles to make it straight along this bottom edge. And that's a little bit lower, you can see, than the front, but maybe that's fine. I sort of like that when things are a little bit lower. Or you would use your Edit Curve tool. So with the Edit Pattern tool, the regular one, we would hold Option or Alt, or you can press C for the hotkey. I would want to change this up a little bit too, and just fine tune the changes that I made using that Edit Styleline tool. And I would simulate to apply those changes. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so we made some adjustments to it to really perfect or try to get as close as we can get with the details of this garment. But now I want to start looking at the fit of it and the balance of my two panels. And how I'm going to do that is using the fit map. So you have your different fit maps here, like pressure and pressure points and stress map, but this is the one that I use almost always. This is your fit map, and the two colors, red and yellow, are going to tell you if a garment has any area that is completely unwearable, too tight, and the yellow just means it's pretty tight, but it's sort of not as bad. And we're looking pretty good. Nothing is too crazy. The other thing is it will turn red if you have a section, one section that is maybe not happy with the other section, like this. So it's much longer segment length, and that's a good way to try to fix any weird shapes or sewing lengths happening. So since we're good there, I don't want to keep that on. I need to turn it off to get back to my regular garment. I'm going to turn this fabric to a lighter color real quick. And let's go into this red. That's fine. And also know there's going to be a difference here. We were using a 50s poplin, so that's going to be a little bit crispy, while this cotton voile is going to have a lot more loose structure to the weave, and it's going to fall a little differently, so that might change the fit a bit. So the other things we would need to know about editing a garment is, let me check the balance lines, meaning we have a pitch to the out seam or side seam of our garment, and I want to see that it's going perpendicular to the floor so that it's straight up and down. A great way to tell that, you can sort of tell right now where the seam is, but it's hard to see exactly what it's doing. So up in your vertical toggle menu in your 3D window, you can change the display of your fabric by going to this fabric section right here, the material, and choosing multicolor. And that's going to color block all of your separate pattern pieces in a random color variation. So now I can see how my side seam is falling just naturally. And there's one thing about dresses that you should know. The front of a dress, especially when it's fitted up at the top bust area, and then maybe it comes down to a loose tent dress fit, you will need more sweep in the front panel, meaning that this side right here needs to come out further, have a little extra than the back, because the bust pushes it out, and it sort of, as the fabric drapes, it wants to drape this way, right? Naturally. So you need more material to meet the back halfway, because the bust is pushing more material out this way. So just remember that the front panel needs a little more sweep in the pattern if you have volume in the skirt area, the bottom, the hip area. And I think this is looking fine for right now. Shoulder is pretty decently balanced. Maybe we could bring that to right there, change that. And it looks a little bit like I would want to bring this curvature in more like this. So let's use our style tools for that. Let's do move Styleline. Actually, let's do edit Styleline for now. That's going to give us a smaller shoulder seam, and now I can edit this curvature a little bit so it prevents us from having a peak at the end of shoulder. I'm going to simulate to apply those changes, and that looks like a happier transition from front to back, while still allowing for us to have enough space to reach the sleeve if it were to have a sleeve. The next thing, I'm going to stop simulation by pressing my space bar. The next thing we would need to do to edit this pattern and get a better fit, a more traditional fit, is I need a dart at the bust and some darts at the waist to share the fitting responsibility of the side seam. So I would have some fisheye darts probably right here at the princess, 2 in the back, 2 in the front. The other thing is I could also make some style lines. I could draw them in using this edit Styleline tool, draw Styleline. Or I can add some traditional darts and then create style lines from that. So to add a dart, there's two ways we're going to do this. There are two different darts, meaning just a regular dart that is going to go into a style line. And then there's going to be a diamond dart in the middle of a pattern. Let's do the bust one first, and we're going to go right into the armhole because if you look at it, that's where it wants to be. This is where it's trying to fold in on itself. And remember, the other great thing about this is that when we select an area in the 3D window, it talks to the 2D window and tells us where that is. So our dart wants to happen about right here. And to add a dart to a seam, we need a segment point. So I'm going to get the segment point tool, the add point split line tool. That's hotkey X, or you can go up to your toolbar. I'm going to add one right here, just by left clicking on a segment, and now we have a new segment point. So to get the dart in there, it's going to be made from this segment point. I'm going to right click on this and say add dart. So notice there's two ways of adding a dart to this segment, to the segment or seam. Adding a dart, just plain dart, is going to remove that wedge of fabric, meaning the length of the armhole will get smaller. And this is what we want because it's not fit right now. It doesn't fit closely to the armhole how we want it. So we want to remove this chunk of fabric. The other one right below it, add dart with fullness, this is going to give us the fullness that it doesn't change the length of the armhole. It's going to add shaping to it, but keep the amount of material. So when you do that, it changes the position of another part of your pattern. So this outseam would likely have a different angle because we're moving it over to create room for the shaping element. So for this, I want just a regular dart, and you're going to get this dialog box. We can start with an inch. It's probably going to be more like 1.5. Let's go with 1.5 for the total dart width, and the length. That's about right if we consider the bust. So I'm looking at my pattern and the silhouette of the avatar, and my apex is going to be about right here. So when we apply this, we're going to need to still edit this in a different direction, different angle, but that's totally fine. This shape dart cap, you don't have to use this. When we do use it, it gives us this. So I'm going to press OK. It asks you, how would you like this segment that we're changing? So our armhole shape, how do you want this to be shaped when we finalize this dart? Because this right here is going to be your armhole. See how the length has changed? It's shorter by 1.5 inches, that width of our dart that we're taking out. And this is what it's going to look like. And if you know what a standard armhole looks like, it has this nice organic sort of J-shaped curve. So what it wants you to do is click and move these red points to get the shape that you want. And let's go with this one. Then you need to hit enter to accept it, and it applies it. Now that's definitely not at the right angle for a dart. All darts are trying to shape around a bigger part of a 3D form, right? So when we put a dart into the bust area, we're trying to shape something our fabric around the bust, which the biggest part of our bust is referred to the apex, and that's the furthest most point out right here. So our apex is about right here. We can also mark this on the pattern if we wanted by getting our internal line tool or baseline tool, and I could just create a little shape right here. Oops. Let me grab the ellipse tool actually, so I can just make a little circle. I guess we can only do that in the 2D window. So that's a little high. I would get the that position a little bit lower. A little lower. And this is one of the reasons I don't really use baselines so much. I like to work in these internal lines. So if I grab an internal line, I can much more easily select and manipulate it. So let's try about right here. And now that will let us move it around until we are happy that it is actually at the apex. Maybe a little bit up. Yeah, that looks good to me. And we can always delete that later. And because I didn't have it selected, or I don't have it selected anymore, you can't see it in the 3D window, and that's because I have my internal lines turned off, the visual display of them. So if I wanted to see that in the 3D window without them being selected, I need to turn that on, which is just in the vertical toggle menu in the garment display. This fourth one over, the red lines are internal lines. My internal lines are pink just because I've changed it in my user settings. So now we know where our dart needs to be directed towards. I'm going to go back to my regular edit pattern tool. I can select just this segment point and point it towards that. Remember that darts need to stay away from the apex. You need to back off the apex about an inch, sometimes closer. So the bigger the bust, the further you want to back off. The smaller the bust, the closer you can get. So a ½ inch to a full inch, depending on the bust size and shape that you're trying to accommodate. So the other thing is, now that we've moved this dart point in this direction, our one dart leg is much longer than the other. And you can't really do that. You need our dart legs to be the same length, unless you're fitting or gathering in one side into the other, which is a thing that's completely doable. So what I'm going to do is drag this out, and when you click on one segment point of a dart leg, both sides of the dart leg show up. So I can see the longer one is 4.29, and I want to bring it out to the same 4.29. Now that should, sometimes you need to reshape that, and you want to simulate and stitch that together before you can tell if you need to reshape that. I like to get rid of these. I don't want excess stuff hanging around these baselines right here. Those baselines were created from the original dart, and it's basically there telling you, hey, here's the reference for the original dart position if you need it later, but I don't want that. So I can get rid of this in two ways. If I select or just right click, and I think I might need yeah, I think I need this. So I'm going to right click with the delete all baselines. So if you want to do it through your pop-up menu, you're going to use this, right clicking on that baseline and just choose delete all baselines. The other way you can do that is by using the trace tool, which is this one. It looks like a little badge or a patch pocket, 2 patch pockets. And this tool has a lot of other functions. It doesn't just delete baselines, and we're going to get into this later, but by using the trace tool, I can just click on that and hit delete on my keyboard, and it goes away. So either way, I want to simulate this now to see what the changes look like. So I'm going to press my space bar. And that fit looks pretty dang good. I might even lower this dart point a little bit more. So redirect the dart just a tiny bit. And also check the lengths. 4.19. Let's get it to 4.19. Okay. So that looks a little better, a little more appropriate for this bust. So I'm going to stop simulation. And just what I was saying before, that after you've changed your dart up a little bit, you might now have a different shape to this armhole. See how it comes up a little bit? This is not as smooth as I would like it to be. So maybe we use Edit Styleline for this. And is it not going to let us do a single point? Oh, here we go. So that is super helpful. Otherwise, we would change the dart over here in our 2D window by getting our edit curvature tool like this and simulating until we were happy with that change. Normally there is a shoulder or neck dart to help with some of this. So we can put one of those in there really quick. I'm going to stop simulation. I'm going to get my add point tool, that's hotkey X. And let's just put it right in the center. So when I'm adding a point to a segment, you can just left click when you're happy with the position right here. Or if I right click while I'm hovering over the segment, it'll give me this line to be more exact with my placement. If I want it right in the middle, I'm going to come right down to uniform split. You can also choose an exact measurement up here by typing it in. Notice that the line 1 is yellow, that's this one, and then your line 2 is whatever else is there. I'm going to do uniform split just to put it right in the middle. So with this one, I'm going to use the add dart with fullness because I don't want to take any of this length of my shoulder seam away. I'm going to go back to my edit pattern tool, hotkey Z, right click on this segment point, add dart with fullness, and you're going to have to click on a whole other segment. So what I'm doing with this is choosing the direction of my dart. And normally a shoulder dart coming in like this, a good rule of thumb is that you want the vanishing point or the direction of the dart to line up with the vanishing point of your other dart. If you use a dart down here for the fisheye, the top vanishing point would likely be around here. So I would want this shoulder dart to point towards the other vanishing point. It just looks nice, it's pleasing to the eye. So my gray line, I would want to try to imagine that gray line passing through that vanishing point at the top of my diamond dart or fisheye dart. The only thing you can't do is go over to the other side if it's a symmetrical pattern. So I would have to stay within this one side, and I can go all the way to this center point if I wanted, and I think that's what we need. And now it's going to ask you to set the width. So how much do I want? Shoulder darts are typically between 1/2 inch and 3/4 of an inch for the entire width. So I can right click when I'm doing that, when I'm pulling my cursor over to find the width, I can right click and I can type in something here. So if we do want a full 3/4, I would just type in 0.75, but maybe let's split it sort of in the middle, close to the middle, and say between 0.5 and 0.75, let's do 0.62. And we definitely don't want it that long, going all the way down there. So what a good rule of thumb for shoulder darts and neck darts is that it's about 3 inches to 3.5 inches. So let's start with 3 inches first. And I do want to shape the dart cap, so I'm going to press OK. I don't want any curvature to this shoulder seam right here. So I can either move these points into a straight line like this, or if I just delete them, I only have a single segment between these points, and that will give me a straight shoulder seam. I'm going to hit enter to accept that. And now it has moved our armhole over a little bit. Did you see how that changed it a little bit? But we didn't lose any length to our shoulder seam. I'm going to still get rid of these baselines because I don't want unnecessary stuff around. And let's see what it looks like by simulating. Okay, that's a little better fit around the armhole. And the thing with this is it's okay to have some gaping right here. Not only do we need enough length across the back to have a comfortable wear, but we need some length here too. So a little bit extra here. You don't want a bunch. Like I would say that's borderline too much right there. I would probably do some more shaping with this. So let's go back to the edit pattern tool. But I don't want to take away all of it, you see. So I just redirected this point a little bit. And that likely will be more in line with our top vanishing point for the diamond dart. But I also want to get rid of a tiny bit of this. So that means shaping it a little bit more, meaning I need more depth in this dart. And that means this curve of my armhole is going to get tighter. So it's going to move towards this. To do this, I'm going to move this part of my segment. This shoulder seam is broken into 2 segments. Now I just want to move this segment over. If I just moved this to get more depth in my dart, I'm losing some of my length of the shoulder seam, so I don't want that. I'm going to Command Z to get that undone. And I can do the same exact thing by just shifting this over. Now I have a little bit more, probably too much. I have a little bit more depth in my dart, but I've kept the length of my shoulder seam. Let's check the length, the line length. 3.24 and 3.29. Let's change this to 3.24 to match the other one. And now let's simulate. Okay, that has a nicer fit and maybe even too much. So you would just go back and forth until you had the exact thing that you wanted. And I just want to keep in mind that we need that little bit of ease in the back area right here. So it can't be full on super tight to the arm, especially if you're making a shirt with sleeves and maybe like a jacket even. You need even more. Okay, I think that's getting pretty good. Those points will soften up when our particle distance is lowered, but it could be that I have this a little bit too long. So yeah, let's go with that. Let's keep that. We also have to remember that if something looks weird, like you see how it's sitting up on the shoulder, that's the collision thickness and the avatar skin offset. We want to change that when we need to see a more natural, a more accurate drape. We would just change the collision thickness of our patterns in the property editor. After selecting both of them, I could come down here and change that to 0.5. When you go all the way down to 0, things start colliding and it doesn't look very good. You can absolutely do that when you're ready to render and get a photorealistic image. But right now I just want to see a little more accurate drape sitting closer to the body. For the skin offset of the avatar, you just click on the avatar to select it, and in property editor find skin offset and change this to something lower, maybe 1. And this isn't going to completely get it sitting where it would naturally like fully flat on the body, but it'll get it much closer. So I'm simulating now, and I can tell right here I need a little help with this shoulder slope. That's an easy fix. And if I want to, I could maybe take the, maybe it's coming out of just the back that I want to shorten, so this line is straight. Yeah, I think I want to do that. And that could have changed from the back that we had, or the back dart, the shoulder dart that we put in. Get my edit pattern tool, and I'm just going to bring this down a little bit so I can see how much I'm moving right there. It's at 0.21 now and 0.29, so about 1/3 of an inch right there that I'm taking off, and that looks better. All right, great. So last thing with editing here, I want to put in some diamond darts. How we put in diamond darts is through the internal line tool. And just like these over here that you see, we need to get some shaping at the waist. And so all of these elements are going to help fit this dress a little bit closer to the body. The side seam can't do it alone. When you're working in a woven, it's not enough to get a close fit just by using a curved side seam. We need fitting elements in another area right here, or else things get weird. Your fabric starts pulling and having dragging lines. So in the internal line tool, I'm going to grab the dart tool all the way at the bottom. And to place these, we're going to consider where is my apex, which we have this marked already. So it's great to have this marked. I want to stay about an inch away from the apex. And the princess seam is something good to aim for, but you don't have to stay on the princess seam when you're making these. You can be a little bit closer. Remember that when seams or darts are closer to center front, it gives the illusion of a smaller waist. When you go further out, it sort of tricks the eye into thinking that the waist is a little bigger than it is. So I'm gonna go right underneath this, and I'm gonna pull out, I'm gonna click and drag my cursor to about something like this. Oops, I'm gonna undo that. When you're doing this, which I totally forgot to do, the biggest part, oh, I guess we have to do it like that anyway. So I'm dragging this, I'm clicking and dragging this all the way to consider the natural waist, which if I move this dart, you can see the silhouette of the avatar and the side of the pattern. The smallest part of the waist is the natural waist. That's where we are cinching in everything the most. So the biggest part of our dart needs to line up there. For the bottom part of the dart, it's usually below the natural waist about 4 to 5 inches. So you don't want to go too far down with this, but I'm going to make a dart about like that. And so it immediately makes this diamond dart for you, and it stitches it up automatically, which is so great. But when you're pulling and dragging out a dart shape like this, it automatically equalizes everything. It makes a symmetric dart. So our top area is the same size as our bottom area, which is never the case when you're patterning a diamond dart. So expect to edit this. Now, if I go, let's go actually to the transform pattern tool, because I want to move this entire thing over. Remember, the transform pattern tool or the selection tool, that will allow me to select an entire pattern piece or an entire element within that pattern piece. So I can click and drag this to be in line with the apex right here. And I'm about an inch. I'm just eyeballing this really. So the top of my diamond dart is about an inch from the apex, but I am still needing my center, the widest part of my dart, the intake, to be level with my natural waist and the smallest part of my side seam, right? That makes sense. If we are cinching the waist at the natural waist, we need all of our shaping elements to be at the biggest point right there at the same level of the natural waist. So I can't do that with the selection tool, the transform pattern tool, but I can do that with the edit pattern tool. I could move a single segment point at once and just nudge it upward, or I do both at the same time to keep them level. So I can select one, hold shift, and select the other for multiple shifts. And I'm going to line it up about right here. And then let's see how long this is. So 6 inches. Let's move this up a little bit. And while I do this, I'm going to hold shift so I can lock into that angle. And I'm gonna do a full 5 inches. It tries to fight you a little bit sometimes when you have the restrained axes in. So let's see what that is again, 4.65. Let's go a little bit longer with that. Oops, that is not what I wanted to do. So let's go with that. Let's see how that works. I'm going to simulate. And you can tell our dress is colliding with the avatar because we changed the collision thickness. Remember, that's the barrier between the avatar and the fabric. So when we lessen that, our items start colliding with each other. The way we get around that while keeping a lesser collision thickness and our skin offset is lower also, we need to increase the quality of our polygon mesh. So we need our lower PD for this. I guess we can go ahead and do that right now. I'm going to select both of these. And I'm not going to go down to 5. I'm going to go down to 15. And that is enough to get it to stop colliding with each other, but it won't slow my processing down too much. Now this is very angular. That wouldn't look too good. I need to review and assess what these darts are doing in the 3D window because that's everything. This is our simulation of our sampling, which is the biggest beauty of this software. If we were doing this in real world techniques like patterning and sampling, we would have to do this sample multiple times to figure out all of these nuances. I'm going to bring this up just a little bit to get a tiny bit more shaping. And then I'm going to smooth out the angular shape of this diamond dart, just like we do normally in real world pattern making. So I'm going to go to smooth curve, and I'm clicking and dragging. I just want to go to 0.5, and I'm looking at that number. You can just freestyle it, but I'm looking at that number because I want to go to that same amount for the other side to keep things equal. So now we have a little bit smoother center of our dart. And these are a little bit weird. We can assess that later when we change the particle distance and see how the real drape is doing. When we put our darts in the back, it's also going to pull this panel back a little bit so it might fit a little bit better. So I'm going to stop simulation. And let's put some darts in the back using that same tool under internal line. And I'm just going to click and drag around the area that I need a dart. So for this one, diamond darts in the back, if this is our waist, we need to keep the top of this around 6 or 7 inches. If a dart isn't curved, like if we only are working with a straight dart, we can't surpass the biggest part that we're trying to shape our fabric around. So we're trying to shape our fabric around the SBL and the butt or hip area. And so those 2 points, this top point cannot surpass the SBL because that's our biggest point. And this bottom vanishing point cannot surpass our hip line, our low hip line, the biggest part of our hip. And just like the front dart, we have the need for this widest part to align with the smallest part of our side seam, smallest part of our waist at our side seam, meaning this area right here. So 6 or 7 inches for this. We can probably move this up a little bit. Not what I wanted to do. Let me deselect everything. I'm holding shift. And let's go to about right there, maybe a little lower. And this one is typically around 5 inches also, depending on what the wearer's torso is like. If you find that it is fighting you, just like you saw me trying to raise this segment point and it kept on clicking to one side or the other, zoom in a little bit and it usually helps you get a better handle on things to manage them, or it allows you to have more nuanced control. And that's around 5. So let's try that. Oh wow, that's super high. That is not supposed to be that high. How did that happen? Let's undo that. So let's keep that there. 6.29. Yeah, let's simulate here and see what it looks like. I feel like we would get a nicer fit if we lowered this just a little bit, and also this a little bit. The other thing is you can get away with having a straight up and down dart for a diamond dart in the upper area, but usually darts look a lot better when the bottom is angled outward a little bit. And that can change this. So how these sew together, you just don't want to get too far away from each other. I guess you could share the difference if you did this a little bit. But these should stay relatively at the same level. You know what I mean? So let's see what that looks like. A little better fit, but we still have some weird dragging and fit right here. We would want to work on this until we got a nice natural drape to this. This would also want to be smoothed out. So you don't want to have any angular areas unless that's a very specific thing that you're doing for a design. And remember, when things are dragging, even in this virtual simulation of a garment, when things are dragging in your fabric like this, right here, that points to the problem typically, always, I mean. So we have now a dragging line in our fabric that is pointing to the bottom of our diamond dart and up to the waist. So we could try to remedy both of these areas, and maybe we want to have a little less fit at the waist to help alleviate this and allow this to come down a little bit. So we could try that. Let's simulate. And that didn't do too much for it. So let's see what happens. And I can't even get over having this software and being able to do this, because any change that I make, just like moving that dart up a little bit, the bottom vanishing point up, I can just simulate right after and see what's happening and then make a change or undo that change. So it's just so crazy. So at this point, I would make minor changes to the shape and the placement of the different parts of this dart to see what this dress wants to be able to fit around this avatar and hang naturally. And remember, if you're wondering where to start, your smile lines or your drag lines are pointing to the problem. Another good thing to use in the fabric display is turning, and this is in the 3D window, so I want to be able to see the avatar's body within the garment, and I can see now where the shaping is happening in relation to the 3D form. So in that way I can say, oh, here's where the real dip is for the natural waist, and my dart is too high. Let me move that down a little bit. Or this I can tell is way closer to the hip than the area up here, so I would want to, or whatever it is. Using this translucent view in the 3D window, very helpful to seeing inside and what the fabric, how it relates to the avatar's body. Okay, so that is making edits to a garment or a pattern to try to fit a custom shape or body. So the more practice you do, the better you'll get at it, the more understanding you'll have for fit in general and assessing and then making changes to remedy problems. But also you should be doing research in traditional pattern making, flat pattern making and draping, because that all informs this process. Knowing how things work and what shapes to expect of certain garment components, that tells you how to work in this program, basically. So you should be doing both, working in here and doing research in real-world traditional techniques, garment production techniques. All right.